Your friends are scrolling through short content, but you, my friend, you're here to learn. Welcome to the RAAAZ Clips. I want to know the point at which you kind of left India. And did you go back to America to kind of study further? Did you travel through the world to study further? Like, what was your journey post-India?
I graduated from the Tilak Ayurved Mahavidyalaya in 1980. And my mother had come to visit Vimalananda in India. And she spent 5 weeks here in India, and we went all around. We went hither and thither. And after meeting her, Vimalananda said to me, you know, my desire had been for you to stay in India and continue to just live a very spiritual life. But after meeting your mother, I can see that your Rananu Bandhana, your karmic connection with your family is such that you need to find a way to be successful and to make your parents feel like you're well established in life and that you're doing something good for people. And so he said, even though I don't like the idea, you're going to have to go back first to the US, and then you'll be going all around the world and trying to assist people to understand a little bit about Ayurveda and Jyotish and Rasavidya and all these vidyas, all these forms of knowledge that we have here in India, and introduce to people all of these things that they have no clue about that really we've been studying for the past many thousands of years. So after I graduated and did my internship, then I went for about a year to the US and started talking about Ayurveda. I came back to India, and Vimalananda and I went on a round the world trip. And then his health was declining. So I stayed here 4 more years here in Mumbai. And then I started spending much more time in the US. And I started in the US, but I gradually went to many different, I think I've taught in, 24 different countries or something. And some countries, like in Italy, I went there for like a week every year for 15 years talking to beauticians in, 4-star conference centers. And I went to the UK 2 or 3 times a year for several years. And I had, a group there. And in Canada, which is where I met Mr. Mantri, who's my Jyotish mentor. And slowly I started getting connected even to other unusual places, like South America and like not so much. I mean, I've been to Africa. In fact, I went to Africa even before. Kind of the reason I got to India was because of going to Africa first.
Where were you in Africa?
I crossed overland from the West Coast to the East Coast. This was back in 1973. I started when I was 19.
Which country did you enter?
Mauritania.
Okay. That's in the southern part of Africa?
It's really in the western part. It's north of Senegal.
Oh, okay.
So landed in Mauritania. And you took back then, in fact, apparently you still do it. You take the iron ore train
right
from the coast inland, and then you take trucks or taxis down Senegal.
The iron ore train goes through the Sahara Desert.
It goes through part of it's an overnight trip, so it's not that far. But yeah, this is actually part of the Sahara Desert. So I went to Senegal. I went to Mali. I came down to Ivory Coast, and I got really sick in Ivory Coast, and I didn't know what to do. But fortunately, God has always been kind to me. So I happened to walk into a bookstore where there were 2 young Frenchmen who were running it, and they said, "You look terrible." I said, "I feel terrible." So they took me to their flat with them, and they said, "We're not going to be here this weekend. We're going to a witch doctor convention, but we have a nice young witch doctor. We would like him to look at your case." So this very nice young Ivoirien, this African man came. He was a bank clerk ordinarily, and he just looked at me for a minute. And he said something into a glass of water. Now, when I got to India, Vimalananda used to use this method all the time. Speak some mantras into water and give the water to somebody and they get the result. But I had no clue about this, so I thought, he's talking into the water. He made me drink the water. Within a few minutes, I got very sleepy. I lay down. I slept for I don't know how many hours. And when I woke up, I was 90% better just from doing that. No, it didn't solve the problem, but it really, it made me rethink what medicine really was and what other things were. And I continued crossing. I got to Nigeria and I got sick again. And I was in a taxi that I was sharing with a Nigerian kid. And he said, "You don't look good." And he said, "I don't feel good." So he took me home with him. And his mother was a nurse. And I had spent a week in Ibadan, great city, Ibadan, head of the Yoruba culture. And interestingly enough, back at that time, there was a woman from Austria who had come down and become the high priestess of the cult of a goddess called Oshun. And without knowing it at the time, this young man, Mr. Olutosin Peters, took me to Oshogbo, which is where the main place of Oshun, and had darshan of Oshun. And I did not have any clue what was going on, but cut to about 10 years ago, and I'm in Sao Paulo, and the deities of the Yoruba have come to the Western Hemisphere in religions like Santeria and Candomblé. And there's a Candomblé house in Sao Paulo. And we happened to go there the day that Oshun is being worshipped. And we have darshan of Oshun right in Sao Paulo.
Those deities were brought during the slave trade?
They were brought during the slave trade. So the slaves brought their deities with them. And, you know, deities are like, in a way, they're like you and me. They want to travel. So I live in Houston, Texas, and in the southern part of Houston, in a place called Pearland, there is a Meenakshi temple. It's the only Meenakshi temple that's outside India. And you go to it, it looks like a South Indian temple, even though it's in Pearland, Texas. And the people are everything is really pakka. It's a very well done. It's just like the Meenakshi temple, but it's in Texas.
I got to bring you back to Africa.
Yes. So I get introduced to Oshun, and I don't know that, but I'm introduced to Oshun, and then I go through the Congo. And a few years ago, I do 23andMe, and I find out that though I had no clue of it, I'm 0.5% Congolese.
What is 23andMe?
It's you test your saliva and find out where your genes have come from. So most of my genes have come from, half of it from my father, definitely from Central Europe, the other half from my mother, most of it from Northern Europe, but a little bit of Jewish blood and this little bit of Congolese blood.
How do you think that got in there?
One of my great-great-grandfathers owned slaves. And after the Civil War, he didn't want to live, he was living in Texas. He didn't want to continue living there because he wanted to continue owning slaves. So he moved down to Brazil, where they continued to allow people to own slaves until 1881. And his daughter, who had been born in Texas, went down there with him and then went back up to Texas with him thereafter. And after he left Brazil, because after the slave trade ended, then managing his cacao plantation was not so easy anymore. And unfortunately, he thought that he had a diamond mine and he thought he knew how to trade diamonds, but that's a very specific kind of thing. So he ended up, unfortunately, getting involved in a plot to counterfeit Brazilian currency. And the U.S. had just made it illegal. It was always illegal to counterfeit U.S. currency, but just made it illegal to counterfeit foreign currency. And they wanted a test case. And so they got his brother and they got the brother to rat out on him. There was a big case. It was in the New York Times. He went to jail. And now his poor daughter is there, she's come back from Brazil and her father is in jail. What position does she have in society? So she ends up meeting a guy named Lum Atkins. And Mr. Lum Atkins, we don't know where he came from. So he easily could have had some of this Jewish and Congolese blood in him. Wow. That's where I think he came from.
How do you trace back that far?
one of my cousin sisters is very interested in tracing genealogy. And nowadays you have all kinds of people are trying to find out where, especially in the US, because lots of people, they've disconnected from where their ancestors came from. And they don't have any clue. And they're trying to find out what's going on with their ancestors.
Okay. Coming back to that Africa phase.
Back in Africa. So now I go through Congo, and I don't know anything about this, but I feel right at home in Congo, and I'm also welcomed in Congo. So this is nice. I continue going, and I get to Kenya.
I got to pause you a little bit because we've reached the East Coast now.
Yes.
What was Africa like in the 70s, I'm assuming?
73.
So have you seen this movie called The Last King of Scotland?
Yes.
That was one of the first movies I saw which kind of drew out a picture of 70s Africa, and I kind of got scared after seeing that movie.
Well, and I did not go to Uganda because of Idi Amin. But otherwise, I had no trouble whatsoever. A couple of times I just slept by the side of the road. I mean, giraffes were walking across the road. There were chimpanzees. I never ran into any big cats except in a national park. When I turned 20, I was in Ngorongoro National Park, and I was waiting to get into a hut, and 2 hyenas showed up. And I really, what did I know? I was a white kid from the US. I didn't know whether hyenas attack people or not. I didn't know whether hyenas could climb trees, but I thought I'm going to climb the tree and at the very least I'll drop down on top of them or something. But the guys with the key showed up and the hyenas left and so on. So I never found out whether they were going to climb the tree or not. I don't think they can.
Was it safe for a white person just...
Totally, yeah.
Throughout Africa?
As long as you were polite to people. And the people back then were these countries had just been, like Kenya became liberated from the Brits in 1965 or something like that. So they were just getting, it was before various problems started to kick in. So everybody was feeling like, there was this sense of openness and freedom, and Africans are very hospitable. So people always took care of me. And it was great to just sort of meet them and find out what they were doing and how they lived their lives and the degree to, how they interacted with their deities, for example.
What's the energy of the land like? Or can you not generalize?
No, you can generalize. And I think the best way to say it is in the way that one of the first people I met here in Mumbai when I came here was a lady who was married to a Punjabi, but she was a Naidu from South Africa, born in South Africa. And so she knows about, she was a native of Africa. And she said, Africa is all about the earth element. So it's you when you go there, if you're paying attention, you really feel that you are connected to the earth element. And as long as you act from that perspective, and then you'll be fine there. But the earth element generally is very stable. So it has it back before all of the Arabs and the Europeans and so on came and started manipulating things. Naturally it had problems like every place, especially diseases. But it's a place where there is the potential for great stability and the potential for things to get stuck, both. So it's very strongly connected to, we would think of as the Muladhara, the root. So if you have a good relationship with your root chakra, then that's good because you will have an innate stability. And if not, you will have innate instability.
Did you feel any connection with India while you were in Africa, based on what you learned about India after your Africa journey?
I didn't have any idea about India. I knew I was going to Nepal. I had read an old translation of the Bhagavad Gita while I was in high school, but I really didn't have any feel for India one way or another. So I got to Kenya.
Yeah.
And I had been accepted to participate in an expedition into the back at that time was in the back of beyond in Kenya, to this tribe that this was the second time only that that anyone from the outside was coming to meet them. Nowadays, of course, everybody has met everybody, but back then the tribe was very much separate, the Pokot tribe. And there had just been a total eclipse of the sun a week earlier. And so they wanted someone from our group to join the tribe, kind of like you joined in with this guy in Australia. And so I volunteered. And so there was this whole thing, and it involved there was dancing. And originally, I would have been expected to go out with a spear and kill a lion. Fortunately for me, things were different. And all I had to do was kill a goat with a spear.
Wow.
And that was a hard thing to do because I'd never tried to kill the spears are like 6 feet long, and you had to hold the leg of the goat and stab it. So you wanted to get into the heart so the thing would not suffer. And so I couldn't figure out how to do it. Finally, the guy with me guided my spear also. And then we drank some of the blood, and then there was a lecture by the old men, and at least back then, people, what you call toddy here, which is fermented juice from the top of the coconut, they call palm wine there. So the old men drank a lot of palm wine. They talked about the ancestors and traditions and so on. And I have to say that when I got back to, eventually I flew to the UK. I crossed overland to Nepal. I came down. I got to Bombay. I was actually going to take the boat back to Mombasa and spend time with the tribe, but then I got diverted into India. But after having this experience of initiation, I can definitely say that it opened something for me that has provided a connection that I can still feel that connection to the land of Africa, thanks to that initiation.
Let's talk about this. This sounds a lot like an African version of Tantra.
Yes.
And, if you actually go deep into the Indian forests and you actually meet the tribals, they have their own versions of Tantra.
Yeah.
Which makes me think that maybe tribes all over the world have followed some version of Tantra, or what we refer to as Tantra.
Yes, because, what does Tantra actually mean? What it means that you want to learn about how things actually work in the world. Modern people, we're relying on all of these things, and we're moving through the world, but we're moving through the world because we have all of these things. Mm. We have food that is delivered to us. We have a place to stay. We have the AC, thank goodness. And all of this is very convenient. But suppose, just go back, to the Aboriginals in Australia, for example. They were doing this even 500 years ago. But just go back to when let's go back to everybody 20,000 years, 30,000, 50,000 years ago. You were always wondering where the food was going to come from. You were always wondering whether something was going to attack you or not. You were always wondering whether you were going to be safe where you were going to be. You were always wondering whether some disease would come through and what you would do about it. So people they simply couldn't behave like we behave nowadays, which is to ignore everything and assume that all of the plants and animals are there for us to enjoy in whatever way we want to enjoy them. People understood back then that animals and plants, they have their own societies. They have their own ways of interacting with one another. They have their own attitudes towards one another. They don't trust humans because humans are not trustworthy. But if you are very patient and you are very open and you're very respectful, they may let you see a little bit of what they're up to.
Plants and animals.
Plants and animals both.
Okay. And you're saying this based on what you learned in Africa? Or like
and then what I've continued to learn in other places also. It's like you can, the environment is there for you to interact with. You have to know how to interact with it. And you have to you if you value your life, you have to always remember that it's not human.
So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you check out this playlist for more videos just like this. It's TRS Clips.